Here we go. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our Del Niente's Fellow Travelers podcast. I am delighted to be joined by the great Hilda Paredes. One could say that Hilda Paredes is one of the leading Mexican composers of her generation, but I think I'd rather just keep it simpler and say that she is just one of the great living composers. Just a little bit of her, just a little background, and then she can tell us more about it. She studied at the National Conservatory in Mexico City with Mario Lavista, excuse me. After this, she has lived in Great Britain since in the UK since 1979, where she studied with Peter Maxwell Davies, Harrison Birtwistle, and Richard Rodney Bennett. I could read a list of all the ensembles that she's worked with, but you would get very bored quickly because it's simply all of the great ensembles and players of the world, including people like Ensemble Intercontemporain, the Hilliard Ensemble, Ensemble Moderne, Ensemble Recherche, Ensemble Signal, Ensemble Suspeso, ICE, the London Sinfonietta, the Arditi Quartet, just a who's who of the great new music performers in the world. And she's also extremely prolific, having written in really most major genres, including opera, ensemble music, solo music, you name it. So I'm very pleased to welcome to the podcast Hilda Paredes. Welcome, Hilda.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor to be
Oh,
here.
it's a pleasure to talk to you. I'd love to hear if you, I think you have a really interesting and unusual set of cultural kind of intersections that I think make your music like truly special and unique. Being a composer who's from Mexico and still retains very deep roots in Mexico, and who's lived in the UK for a while, and who's also really interested in Indian classical music. I wonder if you want to talk about the background that you have in any of those areas, just open-endedly.
Well, yes, I have a it's like a mixed bag of opportunities I have come across my way during my life, and I actually started learning music when I was a child because one of my classmates, his father was a composer,
Mm.
and he was teaching in the garage of his house. Uh,
In the garage of his house?
Yes, he was teaching children. He was a composer and he was devising all this incredible music taken from the um, uh, nursery children's Mexican music. He would adapt it to teach children using Mexican percussion, including the Aztec. He had them built specifically for this purpose, tiny little huehuetls, which is can be really big, that were used by the Aztecs, little marimbas that he had specially devised for the kids.
Oh,
And
wild.
he wrote these incredible adaptations, recreations, real composition based on the songs and games we used to play in those days. We used to be able to play in the streets, no longer
Yeah.
possible. Um, and I was very lucky because I was introduced to music through an incredibly creative uh, m- m- output that this man made, and it was fun, and I learned a lot. So I guess I grew up being a little bit naive about what music was really about, meaning that the kind of training I underwent when I became a teenager. And
And so that was all in that's all in Puebla in Tehuacan, is that?
Mexico City in Mexico. I grew up in Mexico City.
Okay.
So that was my first encounter with music. The name of this composer is Cesar Tort, and he ended up creating a school that is still active in Mexico City. Um, and then as a teenager, I went to the conservatoire, as you said, and I Mario invited me to all these crazy concerts for which there were not uh, big audiences, just a
Hmm.
handful of people, and people like John Cage, um, Xenakis, and Luigi Nono visited Mexico in that period in the mid 70s and late 70s. And that was a turning point for me.
Mm.
That really did things to my head. And for some reason, I was no longer interested in rock and roll as much as I was interested in the music of these guys. For me, this was really way out
So
and
you were interested in rock and roll for a while?
oh yeah, of
Okay.
course, I was a teen. And no, I think I was a pretty normal teenager. Yeah, Beatles. I learned my English through the Beatles, really.
Oh, wild. Okay. Oh, so I, as I said, my Spanish is a work in progress. It's getting better. But the way that I'm learning Spanish is to actually listen to Spanish radio in Chicago.
All right.
So this is the way that so similar story. But anyway,
Yes.
please go on.
Um, so then, after a few years, I left my country um, with a small suitcase, my flute, and an incredible heavy load of dreams in my head. And I arrived in London, and I started to become acquainted with a lot of new music. And soon after that, I went to an Indian music concert. And this really blew my mind again, and I thought, what is this? How does this work? And at that time, I was really questioning and wondering how are we able as composer? I was not sure I was going to be a composer then. I had
Oh,
written
okay.
only a few pieces by then. I was much more of a flute player then. I didn't have grant, so I was trying to make ends meet through playing my flute.
Like playing in orchestras, playing chamber music and such thing.
In London, no, I'm playing in the streets. I was a busker
Oh, wow.
in the
Great.
underground, and then soon after in Covent Garden Market, we just opened in 1980. So, and then I met other musicians, and we started doing chamber music, and we got a few concerts. And yeah, to be able to play in an orchestra, you needed to be in the musicians' union, and to be in
Hmm.
the musicians' unions, you needed to have a work permit, and all these other implications. And I needed to pay the bills, so
Sure.
took my flute and I went in the underground.
This is international things that musicians share is a need to pay the bills.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and so that's what happened in those years. But then I was just thinking how to compose, how to structure a music without having all this sort of tonal, solid infrastructure, harmonic infrastructure that the great classical music has as the basis upon which very large frameworks are built. So what happens when we lose that? And I was very interested in Lutoslavsky and Ligeti and all the great composers of that the last second half of the 20th century. Many of them came to London, so that was an incredible opportunity. Elliot Carter.
Hmm.
So I was interested in finding all these ways, but structure was something that worried me. And when I heard Indian music, that really did things to my head, having been as a child very close to percussion music,
Oh, I see. Sure.
how these rhythmic structures work in Indian music and how they signal the end of phrases
Hmm.
and how refined these superimpositions of rhythms can become maybe even much more refined than in classical music. Um, so this was my interest in those days, and this nourished a lot of my way of structuring phrasing, structuring of my pieces, and I have continued to elaborate a lot. Uh, but this was like the point of the partius, all the different points of the partius for me.
And then, in addition to all of that, you worked with some of the great UK composers as well.
Yes, I went to Dartington summer schools,
Hmm.
and I that's where I met Peter Maxwell Davies, and that's where I met Harriet Whistle, and I did a film course with Richard Richard Ronnie Bennett, and I also went to Siena. I did a course also with Donna Tony,
Mm.
but I didn't get on
What
super.
was Donatoni like? I hear he was a nut.
He was quite a character, quite he's a very fine composer.
Yeah.
As teacher, it didn't work so much for me because it was a matter of learning his technique, to learn how he thought about music. And I was, at the time I went to study with him, I was too entrenched in devising ways that would work for me.
Hmm.
So, but it was interesting to meet him and interesting to meet other composers that were working mostly in France and in Italy.
I mean, this is a totally fascinating story. I mean, I don't think quite knew in detail that you have these sort of three distinct kind of places from which you have developed your like really own very unique compositional voice. I mean, I don't know another story like that really, like that a Mexican composer who is looking for ways of structuring music, living in the UK, and that's such a just a totally unique, interesting perspective in the world. You know, it reminds me, George Lewis, the composer, he has this notion of creolité, of kind of creoleness of music, of different influences coming into play in different people's lives, and it really sounds like you're a great embodiment of that. That's a really fascinating
Mm.
set of influences. Are there well, actually, so let me maybe ask you about this. I mean, you did. There's a couple of pieces, at least, of yours that I really love, that I'd love to just listen to a bit of and get your comments on. And one of them has a title in the Mayan language, and so I thought I might ask you about your Mayan language titles. I mean, and also just in general, I think for a U.S. audience maybe has a different relationship with its indigenous population than is the case in Mexico, where, I mean, Mayan is a language that's still spoken in the Yucatan and other places in Mexico. You can buy Mayan dictionaries, and you see signs in Mayan, and so a lot of your titles are in the Mayan language. And I'd love to hear just about your relationship with Mayan culture and heritage, if you would like to say anything.
Yeah, well, I am half Yucateca.
Oh,
My mother was born in Mérida.
oh, wow.
My grandparents, my grandfather is the source of this interest because he was actually bilingual, well, trilingual. He also spoke English. So, but he, as a child, was speaking Maya all the time. He was from a small town called Oshkushkap,
Hmm.
which is near Uxmal.
Oh, wow.
And actually his land, he was a peasant. His land, part of his land was the ruins of Loltun, which is
Hmm.
part of the Rutapuk that some people know about. And he he came from a very large family, and he was only one of his brothers and he were able to go to university, and he became a doctor, a pediatrician. And because he worked for the social health
Hmm.
department, he kept moving. So he left his native land and ended up in Tehuacan, Puebla, which is where I was born. My father is from there. But when I came to London, I started to, for your audience that or foreigners, where you are an immigrant, you start becoming aware of what makes you different, why are you different, where are
Hmm.
you come from. So this was immediately uh, something that happened to me very soon after I started living in this country. So I became very interested in my roots. I became very interested in learning Maya. I started asking my grandfather to to teach me. So he would print all this. He would type in his typewriter all these pages of things, but he wouldn't talk to me. He would just give it to me.
Oh, wow.
So it's because of him that I started becoming interested, and um, and then many years later, in '94, it was the Zapatista uprising, and I was living in Mexico, back in Mexico already at the time. I went back in 1990,
Hmm.
and this for me was a very interesting thing because I, having studied a lot of Indian dance and Indian dance and Indian rhythms and Indian music, I studied also a lot about the context of this music, and I realized there was a parallel of two countries with great cultures that have been colonized. So to see what has happened to the indigenous communities in Mexico was very strong for me. I felt a lot of support towards the Zapatistas. You have to, for our US audience, you have to know that in Mexico there's over 60 languages spoken as well as Spanish. Some of these languages are in risk of extinction.
Oh, wow.
And so this became more of a need for me to explore all this. So I also wrote an opera that talks about these issues, El Palacio Imaginado, that was premiered actually in the US in 2003. And in this piece, it's based on the story by Isabel Allende that is called also El Palacio Imaginado, part of the stories of Eva Luna. And it talks about the introduction of the pieces. The story takes place in San Jerónimo, a place somewhere in Latin America. It could be anywhere, in which the natives that didn't die victims of unknown illnesses or of tortures, trying to convert them to other religions, or victims of abuse, are so poor that nobody has bothered to extract taxes from them, or so meek that no one recruited them for the war, and they have become so skillful in the art of dissimulation that history did not record them. So this is the introduction of El Palacio Imaginado. So the piece starts with a poem by Juan Gregorio Regino in Mazateco, and is followed by a poem in Maya by Briseida Cuevas Co, someone I have worked exhaustively throughout many years, and the poems are in Zapoteco by Natalia Toledo. And this is the universe of this population in my opera. There's also lots of languages I recorded in situ that I did a lot of field research.
Oh, okay, sure.
So I went to Tehuacan and I recorded 3 different languages, Nahuatl, Popoloca, and Chinanteco, and I recorded for 2 ladies from Chiapas in Tzotzil and Celtal. So there's just an incredibly rich heritage.
Great. Hilda, thank you so much for this like remarkable set of stories you're telling. I think it's of course, living in the U.S., especially at this point in history, the U.S. has a very complex relationship with Mexico, and I would say that like the story of Mexican history is not well known in the U.S., and the story of indigenous Mexican culture is also not well known. There's a general awareness of Aztecs. It's a general awareness, and some people know a bit about them. The people that have been to the Yucatan might know about the Maya, but thank you for helping us understand like how sort of how much culture is at stake there.
May I underline
Please.
also that all these poems, the poem by Juan Gregorio Regino, Briseida Cuevas Co, and Natalia Toledo, they appear in the opera read by them, and is contemporary indigenous poetry that is actually published. Yeah.
Fascinating. Gosh, we should
Show you covers. They're just right behind me.
Oh, great.
If you wish.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, let's do that. Of course, I'd love to talk about your opera Harriet, but I wish we should have thought to talk about El Palacio Imaginado.
Yeah.
But maybe we'll play some of that at the end.
I could take a picture of the books and send them separately for you.
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah.
That'd be great, and we can just put them on the screen. That's perfect.
Just for people that know that these languages are alive and there is literature. It's not just spoken, but they are amazing poetry. Amazing.
This is. I'm gonna buy them after we get off this chat. Maybe if there are translations in Spanish. Thank you so much. So maybe we could talk about one of your pieces that with a Mayan title, and it's a piece from I think 2001, Paaxo'ob. I'm not sorry. I'm sure I'm not saying that right.
Paaxo'ob. Um,
Say it again.
Paaxo'ob.
Paaxo'ob.
I don't pronounce it very. Paaxo'ob. It's
Paaxo'ob.
this little
Uh-huh.
gap. Paaxo'ob. Yeah,
With a little apostrophe, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it means those who make the music. So this is a piece by that was a commission but from Ensemble Modern. So it is very much a concerto for ensemble.
Hmm.
So it has different sections in which different instruments are at the foreground, while the rest of the ensemble is in the background, and then another section where other instrument comes. The introduction is the whole ensemble with different layers, the groupings of different groups of instruments, and then the first section is the horn solo, not solo, only solo, but with in the foreground.
Hmm.
Then there's a transition with the two clarinets, then the flute,
Mm.
and then I think it's the oboe,
Mm.
not the oboe, the cor anglais, and it's
Oh, sure, right, exactly. The Kornglate. Hmm.
that the cor anglais that it's joined by the lower section of the woodwind section, like the bass clarinet and the alto flute. And then the trumpet, the trumpet introduces a virtuoso, more rhythmic section.
Hmm. I want to listen to that section. I love that section.
Yes.
I mean, I love the whole thing, but that's a particularly
It's
clever
quite
one.
virtuoso, yes. That's a lot of that section is built on rhythmic cycles, which I invented, taken from Indian music. But
I was wondering that actually. So
yes,
thank you for.
actually, yeah,
Should we listen to that now?
sure is
I
yes, sure.
I think
Uh,
it's like I have written down that it's 12:10 in the recording, but let's see how that works. It's a little bit before the trumpet, I think, but let's just try it and see if you like this place. Okay, great. We could. I mean, I just wanted to keep listening. I didn't. I almost, didn't stop it because I wanted to just keep listening. But I love that so much. I love that, the sort of like how unpredictable the trumpet rhythm feels, and then how you set it up before that by instruments that are sort of getting, the speed of the repeated notes is changing, and then you get the trumpet with different notes every time, and then these kind of like crazy sounding interjections. Then the trumpet returns, and the trombone is sliding around below it. Someone said about one of your pieces, I read somewhere, someone said sometimes your music is like boxing on ice,
oh,
like,
really?
and I kind of like that as that's kind of how part of that sounds to me, where it sounds like, especially like the end of the piece, which we'll also play, it sort of feels like, everyone's, trying to keep their balance and like slipping and sliding all over the place. And it's just like, I think it's terrific. It's such a great effect.
This
Boxing on ice. That's what I thought of when I heard
section,
that bit. But say something about that if you like.
this section is built on the contraposition of ideas. So I tell you where all this come from. Uh, my interest in Indian music was so deep that I ended up enrolling in an Indian dance class for 2 years. So I enrolled in this dance class, and I became a thief in the way that I would just go learn all these rhythms and would come back and transcribe them all. And
Like a
it's
thief, you said?
a thief of rhythm, you know. Yes,
Yeah.
because I really like these intricate things. And one of the ones that was really one of my favorites is really for the ending, the virtuoso of the dancer. And it goes like this. It's called Lari, and it goes like this. Tat 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 tick 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 day tat 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 tick 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 day tat 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 tick 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 day tat 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 tick tick day 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 tat tat tick tick day 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 tick tick, and I can't do it the rest.
Oh, that
So,
was amazing.
but so why was I interested in this? It's because of the contraposition of two ideas and how one gets shorter and the other one starts taking over. So my thinking was, what would happen if I have more than one idea?
Mm,
Yes.
mm,
And how one can take over and the other one disappeared. And
mm,
so in this section, I think I have one, the trumpet player, the percussion one, the woodwind, double tonguing.
mm.
I think I think about four or five different ideas, and then at the end, and the sliding uh, scale also. Um, so in the end, it becomes really manic. The end of
Yeah.
the section.
Can we
Until
listen to that bit, the bit at the
yes,
end with all the sliding? And
yes,
maybe you can say a little more about it if you
yes.
like.
Mm,
Yeah, just I just because I love this, just for no reason other than I want to hear it. You know.
yes. But
Okay, we can stop there for a second. I mean, I don't want to stop it. You know, I want to just keep listening. But that's a good reason for people to go listen to that piece after our talk. I also love just on a purely visceral level. I just love I love the glissandos in your music, which I think is a pretty common gesture. But it's like the way you execute them somehow. It's like it feels like the trajectory is so clear. It kind of feels like you're skating or something. Like, pew, and then you land or something like that. It has like a very kind of like a lot of like physicality to the gesture. You know, it's sort of like I feel I can like project myself like you know jumping off a hill or something like that, and it's like feels like you're landing or something like that. I love the physicality of those gestures.
thank you. Yeah, I just think very much. If I know the players, I think very much about them, particularly in this piece and a lot of the pieces I wrote in that period. if I don't, I make up a character. So I
Mm-hmm.
very much, and so and a lot of the conception, the original conception, even the harmonic language for each piece, comes from what the instrument gives me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I try to think to get inside the instrument,
Okay.
and yeah,
I think I have two questions about that. So I think, I mean, number one, so I'm interested, first of all, in you said oftentimes you know the player, and if you know the player, you'll write with them in mind, but sometimes you don't, and then you'll make up something imaginary.
yes,
And that's thing number one I want to ask about, say more about that. And the other thing is like getting inside the instruments. I'd be interested in hearing more like, are you interested in the technique of playing or in the timbre or in the instrument's history or like, and so, but talk about the imaginary players first. Have you ever like imagined a player and then like met the actual player and they're totally different than what you imagined and you're like, uh-oh, I wrote this part for this person who's not this. How does that go for you?
well, for example, round about the same time I wrote up a show. I that year I also had a commission from the Melbourne Festival to write a piano quintet. So I knew the quartet. I knew it was for the edited, but I didn't know this player who was in the other side of the world. Michael Kieran Harvey did the
Mm.
premiere. A fantastic player, very nice player. So that's when I had to imagine what he was like. But then I have the instrument and what the instrument can give me. So I devised I knew he was very good. So um, yeah, so I thought of someone pretty good to be able. Sometimes I have pushed the players beyond the limits, and sometimes um, that's been so fortunate. But in this case, it worked out really well. Yeah.
I love this idea of writing for imaginary players. That's the thing that I'm going to
Mm.
keep
Yes,
thinking about. And yeah, so you were, instrumentalist wise, you were a flute player and a pianist. Is that right?
I'm a very bad pianist. I was never very good.
Okay.
No,
I,
because
I say about myself that I'm a recovering pianist.
yeah. Oh, yeah, I like that. Yes. Well, at this stage, I'm a recovering flute player. Well, I was very good flute player, so it takes me a little while to get back, but it's all there. When you have good technique, it comes back very quickly.
Hmm. So yeah, and so
Piano.
your relationship with instruments. I'm just curious to know, like, yeah, are you interested in the player's relationship with it? Are you interested in the technique, in the timbre? How do you approach just writing for an individual
All of
instrument?
that, all of that. I mean, you have to know the instrument's possibilities um, and limitations. And for me, the limitations, I turn them into possibilities.
You turn the limitations into possibilities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's to know how far this can go and to do that. Um, uh, and sometimes you see the thing is you were talking about technology earlier on. Um, I was a very late starter with technology.
Mm.
It was until I did El Palacio Imaginado in 2002. I really went in the studio and I really uh, and I worked a lot in the studio, but I don't know as much as the younger generation. So you go into the studio. I think every composer that has done that never went into electronic music studio and suddenly goes there. I mean, you come back and you're never the same again. you know, you come out of that and it really does things to your head
Mm.
working there because you start thinking of sounds and music in a different way. So um, when I go back to write acoustic music, I have to find ways of reproduce what I'm listening in my inner ear that sometimes is not a conventional way of playing it. So I need to go back to players and ask, how can you do this? Can you do that? How do you do? Or just also, so sometimes by listening to other people's music, you hear things and say, oh, how did he do that?
Mm.
How did she do that? Um, and how far you can push these things. So in a way, my instrumental palette, my compositional palette has expanded because of my relationship with technology.
Oh, wild.
So this has been important. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's really interesting. I mean, that's such an interesting, uh, that's not an obvious outcome, but it's a great outcome, right? That what would happen as a result of using technology is that your relationship with the actual analog instrument would change and expand. That's fascinating.
and an example of that, you find these things in the other piece you were asking me to look at for our purposes, is the Siphonophore,
Hmm.
a fairly recent piece, and also answers the question is how do you write when you know who you're writing? I knew I was writing for ensemble research, and I know they you can play anything you throw at them. So I did that. So um, it has quite a lot of extended techniques, that piece.
Well, maybe we should listen to some of that. This is like one of my favorite pieces of yours, um, and Ensemble Recherche. Yeah, indeed, they can play anything. I remember I once worked with Barbara Maurer, the viola player
Yeah.
from Recherche, and I had seen Recherche play a Fernihoe piece unconducted, and it's Fernie, it's just impossibly hard. And I was like, how in the world did you play a Fernihoe piece unconducted? And Barbara said to me, well, each of us goes away and does calculations on the tempos. And for that piece, I think I probably spent 23 hours doing calculations on the tempos. Then we get together and we argue about who's conducting what. And she said, I usually win. So in any
Yeah.
case, yeah, Recherche can play anything. Let's is there? I have some spots that I would love to listen to, but is there any part in particular that you would like to hear?
I can't think of. Uh,
Okay,
you
why
just
don't,
you choose.
okay, I'll start. Why don't we start at the beginning, and then we'll skip around a little bit.
You have the track there. Yeah.
Yes, and I've got to share my screen here again. Um, Here we go. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. So let's pause there for a second, and then let's listen to one other spot, and then I'll ask you to comment about anything you want to comment about. I do just love that opening, the way it's sort of like it's very like hesitant and like you know tentative, as if like crawling out and seeing if it can go on, and then it does go on, and it's just really I love that opening. But let's listen to one other spot in the piece that I really love. This is going to be, I don't know, maybe more than halfway through. again, I just about let it play to the next excerpt that I was about to play just because I was having such a good time. But I think I just love yeah, I love sort of like you got this very intense noise texture, and then like you move from there to this kind of like glissando-y texture, and the way the texture is like slowly, sometimes suddenly, sometimes slowly, like transition, and they transition to like really not the thing that I'm expecting, and so I really feel like on my toes as a listener. How do you feel about that section?
This is for me very important. The processes of transformation. Yeah, and and this is something I have thought a lot and took it a bit further. Something I remember Peter Maxwell Davies talking about it, but it didn't really click on in my head in those days until much later in life. So for me, all these extended techniques and the inclusion of noise, it's for me, it's a very important uh, element in the range of expression that you can have, yeah, in music. So the processes of transforming one sound into something else, uh, it's it's important. So sometimes for me, it just talking about going back to talking about structure, the journey of a piece of music, the story that a piece of music tells you, goes through different stages, and sometimes to get from one place to another. How do you get from one place to another? You have the moment of transition sometimes becomes the more important for me.
Oh, okay.
Post.
Like the transition is more important than the
Well,
destination.
that's a challenge for me as a composer. How do I get from one idea to another? Yeah. And maybe sometimes that what I thought was a transition, I start finding more and more things, and it becomes uh, uh, a section in itself. It varies.
So yeah, in terms of that's interesting. I wonder how I'd be interested in hearing you talk about, and maybe there's not one way you do it, but it is when you're writing a piece like this work, Siphonophore. Am I saying that right? Siphonophore. And it also has, and we can talk about the kind of extra musical inspirations as well. Is it that do you start a piece like that with an idea that, okay, here's a texture that I like, here's another texture that I like, here's some rhythms that I want to know how to use. I'm going to start here and see how I can transition from this idea to this idea, or is it do you just start at the beginning and let the process take the shape that it's going to take, or do you know exactly where you want to get by the end and you work backwards? How does how does the actual process of constructing the form work for you?
It's different with each piece.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of this piece, I knew I was going to write for ensemble recherche, so I knew I could just go for it without any reservations. I knew this piece was going to be for Trayectoria Festival
Mm.
in Parma, in Italy. And I know the director, Martino Traversa, a very fine composer as well. And I know how much he supports real avant-garde music, and how strong he feels about keeping this festival going despite everything that goes on in the country, and how much he believes in this and has no condescendent, doesn't condescend. He has created an audience of people interested, not a huge audience, but people that are interested. So this was for me was important. So when I was thinking of this piece, I saw the sculpture of Thomas Glassford in Mexico City in El Museo del Chopo, and for me, this piece, talking about shape, the shape of this piece of this sculpture is the way the sculpture is just growing. You
Mm.
know, it doesn't have a preconceived idea, preconception. It just lets the ideas flow. So I will show you. I will screen share the photo I took from underneath this very huge sculpture.
Mm.
Um, I think it's several feet long. So you can,
Oh, wild.
yeah, so it's taken from underneath. Uh, I don't know. I think it's a good 5 feet long, if not more. This
Yeah.
is huge. but this is from how it falls in. So it's just the shapes are just growing out of it, and it's very beautiful, I think.
Yeah, and yeah, and I've seen a photo of the other, and we'll show a photo of the other angle as well. The sort of straight on angle, of course, it's very beautiful. It's beautiful to just sort of look at face
Yes,
to face, but I think this photo really does sort of capture, yeah, the kind of like weirdness of the growth, I guess. If
yes.
weirdness is the right word, or like the kind of unplanned. It looks unplanned, even though obviously it's planned.
Well,
Um,
who knows? Uh,
yeah.
the name is a scientific name. It's the scientific name for the jellyfish.
Mm.
So, and funnily enough, I got stung by a jellyfish just before that. So,
So that's what some of those like,
I didn't think of it until afterwards. Oh dear.
that's really funny. So some of those things at the beginning, those
Yeah.
it's like the jellyfish stinging you or something. Another thing, well, along those lines, in terms of like the marine animal that this is named after, in addition to the sculpture, I sort of like watching Ensemble Recherche play. I also sort of get the sense, like watching them, they look like a jellyfish or something. Like they like as an ensemble, they look like some sort of marine animal that is like has many tentacles and many like moving parts. So that's kind of somehow they capture the energy of the marine animal, even though I'm not sure if that was intentional, but it's
And they play without a conductor, so they know each other's movements. So it's like they're part of the same organism, you know?
yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
No, it's amazing. It does look like an organism. It looks like, you can just imagine them like moving slowly throughout the ocean, just waiting to like sting an unsuspecting composer.
Yeah.
Um, um, uh, I wonder if I want to listen to can we just listen to one more bit of this piece because I like it so much? And then I do want to hear about Harriet, of course, because
Sure.
that's a fascinating piece as well. But let's just listen to just a tiny little bit of Siphonophore. Okay, we can stop. We can stop there just for 1 second. And the thing that I love about, about your transitions is what in that clip. It's like we have, um, there are these little crescendos, and then an articulation, and that happens for a while, and the durations change, and then sort of underneath it, you start introducing some scalar figures, and like the balance slowly changes of like the crescendos to the scalar figures, and like so it does feel like this kind of very natural and seamless transition. Um, so yeah, again, I think it's just such a great. This is an overused word, but I think it's the only one that occurs to me in this context. But it feels like very organic. It
Thank
does
you.
feel like an animal, just what an animal might do, just sort of walking around. Um,
Thank you.
so anyway, I love the piece. I hope everyone listens to it. We should. I'd love to hear. So you have written operas, and I think Harriet is the most recent one, right?
Yes.
And I think this is it's an unusual story, or it's a well known story in a way, but it's an unusual subject for an opera, and it's also an unusual instrumentation. So I just love to hear anything about the inspiration for Harriet, and how you approached this subject, and also how you approached writing for the instrumentation, and anything you want to say about the piece.
Well, back in 2012, um, uh, a very good Mexican writer whom I had collaborated in another music theater piece, Jorge Volpi, so very established writer. He became the um, director of Festival Cervantino, which is one of the most important festivals in Latin America. And he is an opera lover, and he started this program called OM21, which is Opera Mexicana, Mexican opera from the 21st century. And he commissioned 6 composers to write operas. I was the last one. My opera was due to be premiered in 2018, which is when it was done. And very soon after that, I went to the offices and I started realizing that the budget, although it's a very important festival, the budget for each opera was pretty restricted. So I had this wonderful idea of a big opera I wanted to do. I still have. I want to do this. It's a science fiction opera, which I haven't written yet. But I realized it was not possible with those resources. So I really had to, I thought I'm going to do a monodrama. 1 singer and maybe 2 or 3 instruments. Maybe that's it. So I came back and I talked to my dear old friend, Clarence McFadden, American singer from Rochester, but living in Amsterdam for many decades. And an extraordinary, versatile, wonderful artist, all-round artist. And she told me, I said, well, my dear, we're friends for a long time. It's about time we do something. And I have this option, And then I had various ideas, but she said, well, I've always wanted to do something on Harriet Tubman. And me, like everyone in this part of the world, didn't know her, didn't know anything. I know it's a real icon in American history, but it's not known so much outside. I hope now more. Not just because of my opera, but the film and all the issues with a $20 bill and all these things.
Right, sure.
So that was the beginning of my journey of research and discovery of this extraordinary woman, which appealed to me immediately because all my operas have had something to do with humanitarian, political, and gender issues. I don't talk about gender issues, never have done, only recently because people ask me, but it has come out in the music I've written for the stage. And then I had a meeting with Guy Cullen, the director of Music Theatre Transparent, which Clarence was an artist in residence there. I think still is, but I'm not sure. And I know Guy for a very long time, and I told him the story, and he said, yes, go for it. But of course, again, there was a limit of resources. So we had, I could choose 3 instruments. I said, well, the more I researched it, the more I thought I can't do this. And 3 instruments that were fairly portable. So no piano, so violin, guitar, and percussion because I can have many different sounds there.
Percussion is a good hack. That way you can cheat a bunch of instruments in there.
But I said I have to have electronics, because without that, how do I tell the story of this woman without more, And then I searched for different studios, and in the end I went to CERM, to the studios in Nice. And I worked there, and I met my assistant, a younger person. First time ever I worked with a lady. Monica Gil Giraldo was fantastic person to work with. This is very important for me to have a good rapport with my assistant, because I'm not technologically trained. I know now, I learned from them. I learned an enormous amount from them, from her. And that's how it came about. And then from having very limited funds, people started getting interested, and people started. Then in the middle of all these years, Jorge Volpi suddenly left the festival, and I said, "Oh no!" and became the director of the the cultural director of the university in Mexico, which is
Sure.
a cultural institution. It's not just a university; it's like
Right.
a real place to create art. So he took the project with him. So he helped us financially, and like this, and then Music About got interested, and they helped in the production. So in the end, we were able to, and then the design we didn't know, and then through Cara, what's her name? Oh, this wonderful artist, Cara Walker recommended Miwa Matrayek for the design. And then Jorge introduced me to Mayra Santos Febres, a beautiful writer from Puerto Rico who knew a lot on the subject matter, but not very experienced with librettos. So that was an issue. We needed more dialogue. So then that Lex came in the end. This is an issue for you, for librettos. You know, you need, it's such a deep specialized thing. It's something I could talk a lot about, but I won't go. But the project started growing and growing, and then it became what it became, and it's been very appreciated. We just recently, Harriet won the I was Composers Award in December in this country, in the UK. So it was very, very good, because I think the story is amazing. And for me, it was also had its challenges, because the one thing I was fascinated with was to discover that because of the illiteracy of the slave population, they had to find different ways of communicating. So one of the ways they communicated was through music. So all these spirituals that we all now know were used then to send messages to the fugitives or possible fugitives to help them escape the south, the plantations where they were being kept as slaves, to be able to go north. So for me to be able to do that research was fascinating, and to integrate those into the dramaturgy of the music was very important. Not just as a form of illustrating or to be nice, but as part of the story that we're telling. Every single tune that appears was used in the way it was, in the way that is used in the opera, is the way it was done according to the research I did. So maybe I pay you an
Great.
excerpt
That'd be great. Thank you.
of this, now that we talked about this. So that would be around 30, maybe around there.
Oh, great.
Let's go. So this is when she escapes finally the plantation, and she's hiding.
I'm going to cross the line. My mom was just going to milk. I couldn't let her know. Doctor came riding up on his horse, but I had to tell her. I had to tell my beloved Red. Steal away to Jesus. And I bowed when the doctor passed. I ain't got long to stay. He turned around the saddle looking at me as if there might be more than this. Doctor still gazing at me. Steal away to Jesus. Steal away home. I ain't got long to stay.
So this is, for example, no? When you have to get ready, this is a tune that was letting people know you have
get ready
for tonight.
Wow.
So she's trying to communicate, but and the tick of the instrumentation for me is the pulse of the hearts. How you have to pretend nothing is happening, but of course you're terrified because of what's going to happen. So it starts accelerating, and also you have to pretend everything is normal because
everything's normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's. I mean, just that effect is so remarkable, and you get so much out of just those three instruments and the singer, and it's like, and it's not even like a lot's happening, but somehow like the whole thing projects this atmosphere of like incredible tension, and uncertainty, and like, but it's just three instruments and a singer. I mean, it's remarkably like parsimonious, I think, and then sort of like it's and it feels like maybe it's kind of a dream state. I think, at least I read it as like it comes to me as if it's a dream state, because you do have this recognizable tune that sounds like a tonal, or like sounds like a modal tune perhaps, with all this sort of commentary around it, like you say, like the pulse beating and like a kind of the dreamy looking horse. So it's really dramatic, but also very uncertain and unsettling, I think, in a really great way that like I think conveys what you're trying to convey, which is like the tension and like the terror of that situation.
Well, I mean, that's what opera can do. You can get into the psychology of the characters, and you can relay many different situations at the same time. Something you cannot do with a text.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, exactly. It's like you do get a sense of the complexity of the character by like there's multiple modes of commenting on the psychology of the character, based on how you have it set up. Fabulous. Great. So that's the entire opera, right? There is a video of the whole thing.
I don't think it's available publicly.
There's I see. Okay.
Excerpts of
I see.
Video online, but
well, yeah, we'll put a link to the online to the excerpts along with the show. Yeah, I mean, so is it being performed again soon?
Well, we have a date for the 3rd of October at the South Bank in London, but with the current climate, I don't know what's going to happen.
Knock on wood, right?
At the moment, we're all, because everyone is in different countries, so if there's traveling restrictions, and also we don't know how many people are going to, I mean, the tickets were selling pretty fast in February when it first went on sale. But I don't know how many people are going to dare to go out and sit next to each other. So
sure.
So I mean, this is going to be a long process, I think.
Well, speaking of which, I mean, if you want to say, how are you? I mean, we're recording this in the time of COVID-19, and in the U.S., I think we just heard the other day that Chicago, our stay-at-home order has been extended, and I know the UK has had obviously its own struggles. How are you holding up?
Well, I mean, from in many levels, as a composer, I'm used to. I need isolation to create, and together with being self-employed sort of musician, I don't have a job as such. I create my own work, so I've been using my time quite. I'm quite busy, and always these Zoom meetings and stuff. Um, so yeah, it's difficult financially, of course, for everybody because so many things are cancelled, um, and it's given me a lot of food for thought for my next opera also, which is
Yeah.
it's about yes, I'm trying to create a dystopian society, and I think this is giving me a lot of food for thought.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Honestly,
Yes.
that's I'll be interested to see how you create a dystopian society because you yourself seem so non-dystopian.
Ah,
Um,
yeah. Well,
so maybe that means you have an imagination that can do it.
well, I have
Um,
to. Yeah, I have to do a lot of research and read a lot of sci-fi also. But at the moment, reality is so surreal that it's already giving me the kind of environment.
you don't need
A lot of
inspiration.
people will not be able to go out because the air has become so poisonous.
Yeah.
That's the environment for my new stuff.
Okay, that's it. Let's just go straight there. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. Hilda, it's just it's a great pleasure to talk to you. It's
Thank
really
you so
just,
much for your
um,
time.
I was looking at my phone the other day, and the only silver lining of this whole awful thing where everything is canceled is that we get to talk, I suppose. I was looking at my phone the other day, and the notification showed up that Del Niente was meant to have performed your harp, an ensemble piece called De Mente Cuerda, just recently, and we had to postpone that concert, obviously, and we're looking forward to getting to do that piece in the fall. We're
Oh,
already planning to we're already planning to do it. So hopefully we'll have you be able to have you in the United States in the fall. But the only silver lining of having to cancel that performance was that it enabled us to have an opportunity to speak together. And it's just such a pleasure you're such an inspiring figure and such a great composer. And hearing your life and your stories is remarkable.
thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. It's a
Yeah,
big
it's a
big
great
honor.
pleasure.